Welcome, deep divers. Today, we're tackling a military rank that, well, it messes with your head a bit. The colonel.
Ah, yes.
You see it spelled C-O-L-O-N-E-L, but then you say colonel. It's quite the puzzle, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And you know, what seems like just a simple military title, it actually packs in centuries of really fascinating history, linguistic twists, changing roles.
Right.
So this deep dive, it's not just about the rank itself, it's really about unraveling the whole story behind that name, how it went from being almost like a private business deal.
A business deal. Wow.
Yeah, seriously, to, a professional position. And then its surprising modern uses, sometimes way outside the military.
Okay, absolutely. So our mission today is to guide you through all that history, the modern details of this senior rank, from those really strange origins right up to where we see it pop up unexpectedly today.
Sounds like a plan.
So where should we start to untangle this linguistic knot? Let's just jump right into the pronunciation mystery. It feels like a deliberate trick, doesn't it? How on earth did colonel start sounding like colonel?
It's a great question, and honestly, it's a fantastic linguistic journey. It goes back to, like, late medieval military changes and this real mashup of different languages.
Okay.
So picture armies around, say, 1500, Spanish particularly. They started grouping soldiers into these units called colonellas. Think columns, basically, maybe 1,000, 1,200 guys.
Right, columns. That makes sense visually,
Right.
like on a battlefield.
Exactly, colonellas. And the guy in charge, he was the cabo de colonela, the column head.
Got it. Column head. Logical.
But here's the twist. Because these were often crown units, reporting directly to the king or queen.
Ah, the crown.
Right. They also got confusingly called coronelas, sort of playing on corona, the Spanish word for crown.
Oh, I see. Colonella for column, coronella for crown. Bit confusing.
Definitely. And so naturally, the commanders of these coronelas started being called coronels.
Okay, coronel from the Crown Association.
Precisely. We have records like in 1508, the famous Spanish general Gonzalo Fernandez de Cordoba, they called him the Great Captain, he split his armies into coronelias, and each one was led by a coronel.
So they were definitely using coronel for the commander by then, even if the unit name was a bit mixed up.
Correct. Now fast forward a bit, 16th century, the French army picks up this structure.
Okay.
They decide to call the units regiments, which sticks. And they take the Spanish colonela and turn it into the French word colonel, C-O-L-O-N-E-L.
Just like the English spelling.
Exactly. And crucially, the French pronounced it just like it looked, colonel, 3 syllables, pretty close to the Latin root, columna, meaning column.
So the French kept it logical. It makes you wonder, where did the English pronunciation come from? It feels like someone completely misunderstood somewhere along the line.
It really does. So the English, they copied the French system, the regiment structure, the rank title colonel. They borrowed the spelling directly.
Right.
But, and this is the key part, though the exact reasons are a bit murky, the English seem to have adopted the Spanish pronunciation coronel.
Huh. Even with the French spelling, that's odd.
It is odd. So they're writing C-O-L-O-N-E-L, but saying something closer to coronel. And over time, through decades of use, that pronunciation got smoothed out, shortened into the 2-syllable colonel we say today.
Wow. So spelling from France, pronunciation sort of from Spain, mangled over time.
That's pretty much the gist of it. It's a bit like how brigadier relates to brigade. The link isn't obvious just looking at the English words because of these historical shifts and borrowings.
The language just does its own thing sometimes. Picks a bit from here, a bit from there.
Exactly. It shows how dynamic language is. You get these quirky historical accidents baked right into everyday words.
That really is fascinating for just one word's sound. But speaking of history, the actual job of a colonel, that's also changed dramatically, hasn't it? It wasn't always a professional military rank like we think of it now.
No, not at all. Especially if you go back to the 17th century when national armies were really starting to form. Back then, a colonel was usually an aristocrat. And he wasn't just commanding a regiment, he was more like its holder or proprietor.
Proprietor,
Like-
he owned it.
In a way, yes. He literally purchased the regimental contract.
Purchased it.
Yeah. He'd buy the right to raise, equip, and command that regiment, either from the guy who held it before him or directly from the monarch if it was a new regiment being created.
So it sounds less like being a soldier and more like running a business, like a military franchise within the army. That's completely different.
That's a great analogy, actually. It really helps picture how different it was. The colonel was the top captain, and his personal authority, kind of regimented, gave rules to a group of companies.
Ah, so the regiment was tied to his rules, his
Yeah.
contract.
Exactly. The regiment was sort of embodied in that contract and the rules he said. And then by extension, the actual group of soldiers under his command also became known as his regiment.
I see.
And just as a side note, in France around that time, they even had a rank called Colonel General. This was like a super contractor, someone who could command multiple forces if the king wasn't around.
Big player.
Yeah. But over time, that specific role became more of an honorary title, a functionless sinecure, as historians call it. Meanwhile, the guy actually commanding a single French regiment was called a maître de camp, or later, after the Revolution, a chef de brigade.
So initially, being a colonel was really about having the money and the contract, maybe less about being on the front lines.
For many, yes, it was often about administrative control, influence, and even personal wealth. But that started to change dramatically by the late 19th century.
Okay, that's so.
Well, the whole system professionalized. Being a colonel stopped being about owning a contract and started being about actual military qualifications, experience, duties within a ranked structure with set titles, pay scales, the whole modern
The
system.
huge shift
Yeah,
from proprietor to professional.
exactly. And it reflects that bigger change in warfare itself, right? Moving away from these sort of semi-private armies run by nobles towards the highly structured professional national forces we see today. It's fundamental to the modern state.
And did it keep evolving?
It did. In the 20th century, for instance, some of the really large communist militaries actually expanded the colonel rank into multiple levels. So you ended up with ranks like senior colonel, which you still find today in places like China and North Korea.
That's quite an evolution. So let's bring it to today. Given that history, what does a colonel actually do in a modern military? Are they still out there commanding regiments in battle like those original colonel?
Generally, no. In many modern armies, the regiment itself isn't really the main tactical fighting unit anymore. It's often more of a, let's say, ceremonial unit, or maybe an administrative grouping, a focus for loyalty and tradition.
Right.
The actual deployment, the troops on the ground, they're usually organized into battalions. And who commands a battalion? Typically a lieutenant colonel.
Ah, okay. So the lieutenant colonel is doing the direct command part that maybe we associate with the old idea of a regiment commander.
That's often the case, yes. Colonels today tend to operate at a higher level. They're often found in senior staff roles, specialist positions, maybe commanding larger formations like brigades or serving in high-level headquarters.
So more strategic, less direct command of a single unit in the field.
Generally speaking, however, there are some really interesting honorary roles, especially in Commonwealth armies, that keep that historical link to the regiment alive.
Like what?
Well, you have the colonel-in-chief. This is usually someone quite high profile, maybe a member of the royal family or nobility, or a very senior retired military officer.
Okay.
They wear the colonel's uniform, they act as a patron, visit the troops, boost morale, but they have no active part in the actual command structure or in any operational duties. It's purely ceremonial.
Right, a figurehead. For tradition and morale, like you said. That makes sense.
Precisely. And then there's another one, the colonel of the regiment. This title is still actively used in the British Army today.
Okay, how's that different?
It's also a ceremonial position, but it's often given to retired senior officers, generals, brigadiers, or even colonels who have a really strong personal connection to that specific regiment.
Ah, so more of an old boy connection, perhaps.
Sometimes, yes. But interestingly, non-military people can sometimes be appointed too, especially in the reserves. Whoever holds the title wears the full colonel's insignia with the regimental uniform, no matter what their actual rank was or if they even had one. And they're expected to be quite involved, working with the regiment and its Veterans Association.
So it keeps that historical tie, that personal connection to the regiment alive.
Exactly. It really shows how you can weave tradition into a modern military framework.
This is fascinating how it evolved in Europe, but you mentioned its influence spread.
Yeah.
How did this rank travel globally? And did it take on any particularly unique roles elsewhere?
Oh, absolutely. As European military models spread, often through colonialism or just influence, The rank of colonel basically got adopted by nearly every nation.
Wow, nearly every nation.
Pretty much, though sometimes under slightly different names, especially in different branches of service. Like in navies, the equivalent rank is often captain, sometimes specifically ship-of-the-line captain.
Right.
And in air forces that follow the British or Commonwealth model, the equivalent is group captain.
Okay, so it has counterparts across services. But any really unusual situations for the colonel rank itself?
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting. In quite a few smaller military forces around the world, the rank of colonel is actually the highest rank. There are no generals above them.
Really? The highest rank?
Yeah. Think about countries with very small defense forces, like Antigua and Barbuda, maybe Monaco, or even Vatican City with its Swiss Guard. In places like these, the colonel is the top military officer. Sometimes the only person technically above them is the head of state as the commander-in-chief.
That's incredible. So being a colonel in one country could mean being the absolute head of the military.
Exactly. It just shows the huge range of how this single rank is used globally. And of course, the look changes too. The insignia, the badges worn on the uniform, they vary quite a bit between countries and even between services like Army, Air Force, Marines. Even the U.S. Space Force now has colonels.
The Space Force. Right. Okay, with this rank being so widespread and adapting so much, has it ever, like, completely jumped the fence out of the military altogether? You know, maybe ending up associated with, I don't know, fried chicken.
Ah, you mean the famous Colonel Sanders? Yes, absolutely. That's a perfect example of how the term colonel has taken on meanings completely outside formal military structures. It pops up in some really unexpected places.
Okay, besides chicken, where else?
Well, in the United States, interestingly, colonel is also a traditional sort of honorary title for auctioneers.
Auctioneers. Why?
There's a folk etymology not definitively proven, mind you, but the story goes that during the American Civil War, goods that were seized by the armies were often sold off at auction. And the officer overseeing that sale, perhaps for a whole division's worth of goods, might have been the colonel of the division.
Huh. An interesting story, even if it's just a story.
It is, but then you have the Kentucky Colonel. Now, this one's official, but not military. It's actually the highest title of honor that the Commonwealth of Kentucky can bestow on someone.
The title of honor.
Exactly. The governor and secretary of state grant these commissions. It's for people who've made noteworthy accomplishments or provided outstanding service to the community, the state, or even the nation. It's considered sort of symbolically equivalent to a full colonel in the state militia.
And Colonel Sanders.
He's probably the most famous Kentucky colonel ever, Harlan Sanders, founder of KFC. He received the honor and really leaned into it for his public persona.
That's amazing. Any other non-military uses?
Well, the rank or title is also used by some police forces and certain paramilitary organizations in various parts of the world, so it really has proven quite versatile beyond its purely military origins.
Wow. Okay, so let's recap. We've gone from a confusing pronunciation rooted in Spanish and French to a military rank that started as basically buying a franchise.
Right, the proprietor model.
Then becoming a professional officer role, then sometimes a purely ceremonial figurehead, or even the absolute highest rank in some countries' entire military.
Yep.
And then jumping ship entirely to become a title for auctioneers and, most famously, Kentucky's highest honor, embodied by a fried chicken icon. It's truly incredible how one single word, colonel, holds so much history, so many linguistic quirks, and these constantly shifting roles in society. Understanding where it came from really does shed light on why it appears in so many different ways today.
It absolutely does. And, this whole journey kind of raises a bigger point, doesn't it? When we dig into the history of everyday terms like colonel, terms we think we know, we often uncover these hidden layers of meaning, these unexpected connections across time and culture.
Yeah, definitely.
It really helps you become, well-informed in ways you might not expect. So maybe think about other words or titles you encounter. What kind of weird and wonderful journeys might they have taken to mean what they mean to you today?